Welcome. Oh, man. Oh, that came out a little loud.
Welcome back to another episode of the Rick and Danny Show. Happy to be here, Rick. How about you?
Fair to middling.
He's here.
He's
I'm
here.
Yeah.
He
know.
made it over, so.
Resting suburban dad face. Is that what that is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a callback from a previous episode.
It's just a callback from every episode.
Yeah, but you took the cameras away, I think, because is that I heard was scaring away people from subscribing.
Well, I didn't want to say that. I know I've been blaming it on being a one-woman show in the marketing department. But
Ooh.
yeah.
But we hear you have help on the way.
I do have help on the way.
That's great.
If I have to hear about your one-woman show one more time, Brenna.
If we have to hear how busy
I'm gonna
you
walk
are.
out of this podcast. Please say it again. Please say it again.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've helped
No
on the
one's
way.
making you do a podcast. I've been very clear about that.
What are we going to do?
What would we do?
What are we going to
Yeah,
do?
I
Break
mean,
Danny's heart?
No,
Look at
yeah.
him.
Danny would just have his
we're
own TikTok
we're
channel. We already
trying to
know-
make this a national thing, Rick.
Yeah.
We already
and
know-
we're a fourth of the way there.
We already know where this is going.
Yeah, 25% of the way there.
You're going to have a TikTok. And you would just
It's
vent,
TikTok,
you would
yeah.
vent your
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't
Danny
need a
show-
TikTok.
The
No.
Danny show doesn't just have the same pizzazz as
The Danny Show, yeah.
The Rick
Yeah,
and Danny
the
Show.
Rick and Danny Show.
Again, why are you both in here? Because Rick and Danny sounded the best together.
That's just because of the names. That's
Because
it.
of the name, so
Not the personalities.
Blame your
the
parents.
names.
a little bit of the personality.
A little bit. If you
Or-
could see
or-
his face
or
now,
personality.
you can see the face now.
Personality singular.
Sorry, that was me silently killing myself on the
Ooh,
inside.
but you're still here. And you'll be back.
My physical flesh is here.
There will still be calendar invites that you will have to show up.
Yep.
You
Your
mean
schedule will still maybe get blocked.
you mean weekly? Hey, we're doing it today, and then day of something happens where we can't do it the way we plan on doing it. Yeah, okay.
Hey, sometimes, people get sick, guests, can't
As Jeff Goldblum
make it for some reason.
Dogs get kicked.
As Jeff Goldblum
Dogs.
said in Jurassic Park, life finds a way.
Life finds a way, yeah.
But we're here.
It's true.
Aren't you happier that you're here with us?
No,
You're lying. I'm gonna cut in,
Oh,
yes.
for sure he is.
I'm gonna just cut
This
in.
is-
Yes.
that's gonna be the most awkward.
like a really yes.
Yes. That's not
Yes, I
literally-
am very happy to be
literally not
here
even my
right
voice.
now.
It's gonna be me. Yes, I am.
Not- literally not me.
Well, we're going to get your reaction again to another article
All right.
presented by
Yeah, it's a rant day.
Danny, coming to you from New England Journal of Medicine again.
So
Sponsored by
Wait,
Dunkin'.
I was gonna say, is it Danny brought to you by the New England Journal of Medicine, sponsored by Dunkin', or is it
Yes,
New England Journal
that
of Medicine,
sounded well,
sponsored by Dunkin', brought
Good.
to you by Danny?
just as you said it, Rick.
That sounded well. Are you okay?
I'm drinking too much Dunkin'. I'm getting a little too edgy.
There is no such thing as too much Dunkin'.
That's true.
Yeah, there might be for him.
For me, I'm a little more sensitive to it than you, Rick. But that's, let's just get into
I
it.
just wish I was.
Well-
I had your caffeine response,
Mm-hmm.
and I could feel something again. I'm dead
He's
inside.
numb
Danny.
to caffeine.
I'm
Actually,
dead inside.
drinks it all day long, and he's still numb.
I'm dead inside. My
Brenna's gonna cut all this
Mike-
out.
Oh no, I'm not. Absolutely
my
not.
caffeine receptors have burned down decades ago.
Speaking of receptors, Rick,
Oh, look at that.
Good segue.
have you heard about BCMA?
Can you sit like a half an inch back? Thank you.
Brenna's saying I'm talking too loud again.
Well, her eardrum is bleeding.
Yeah. Can you see it?
Well, she has headphones on. Yeah. So, BCMA. Have you heard of it?
BCMA. That is a receptor. I'm going to put that together.
Yeah.
For multiple myeloma.
For
patients.
multiple myeloma.
That's all I know.
B cell maturation antigen.
Okay.
So this was the first receptor for which they created CAR T cell therapy for myeloma. I believe it's the first, so I'm sure there's some historian out there that's like, it's not the first,
Can
Danny.
you give the listeners and your friendly radiation doctor
Yes.
give me CAR T cell therapy in a 10,000 foot real brief nutshell. What does that mean?
Very briefly, so you take a patient's immune cells, you hook them up to a machine which filters out their immune cells, their lymphocytes. You send them to a lab that has the capability of engineering those lymphocytes, which are white blood cells, to express a protein of your choice on the outer layer of the cells. And once they inject, and they usually do this via a viral vector, like a virus that introduces a protein into the cell, they make sure they collect enough of the cells, and then they bring it back to the patient, infuse it in after chemotherapy is given, and hopefully those immune cells fight the cancer because they have a target to go to.
The way to think about it for the listeners, your engineered immune system specifically targeting a protein on the cancer cells.
Correct. Yep. The protein that is expressed on the immune cells binds to the cancer cells. That's the hope, at least. So this article...
That was a really good tag team. You guys should start a podcast.
Oh, very nice. I wonder what we'll call it.
And why?
So this was an international phase 3 trial, and it was looking at relapse refractory multiple myeloma. So patients needed to...
real quick. So relapse refractory means...
Relapse refractory means that they've been through multiple lines of treatment for multiple myeloma. Multiple myeloma is a type of blood cancer affecting plasma cells, which are the cancer cells that grow uncontrollably in their system. It can wreak havoc on your bone marrow, affect your kidney function, affect the bones, a variety of systems in your body, and patients can get very sick from this disease. So it needs treatment when you diagnose it, and there's standard treatments that we give for multiple myeloma, and most of them are targeted treatments, meaning that they're pretty good at targeting the myeloma cells, and we use combination therapies of different drugs. Those drugs, the class of drugs, some of them are called IMiDs, they modulate the immune system and hopefully try to get the immune system to help fight the myeloma, and that's those cells or those therapies are called Revlimid and Pomalyst. Revlimid is usually given frontline therapy for myeloma with combination of a proteasome inhibitor and possibly a new drug called daratumumab, and those are all therapies given in the frontline setting when someone's diagnosed with multiple myeloma. Now, at some point, multiple myeloma is thought to be a disease that can't be cured with standard therapy. So even patients that go into a deep remission after their initial treatments usually have relapse disease where it shows up again in the blood. Refractory disease would mean that they didn't respond well to therapy at all, so they might not have achieved a response with frontline or even second-line therapies.
So it's kind of saying, just takeaway is it's kind of the worst of the worst actors where their disease is obviously not cured and has seen multiple lines of therapy, and presumably these are going to be the more aggressive
types of multiple myeloma. And we risk stratify everyone from the beginning, and it's based on genetics, where we look at what are the genetic changes in the myeloma cells which led to the development. So this was looking at a BCMA CAR T cell therapy, and I'm not going to say the long drug name because I can barely pronounce it, but just so the viewers know that No, I'm not. I'm not.
You have to try now.
Yeah, you have to.
It's abbreviated Adacel. There we go. The abbreviation.
Come on,
but the whole name,
I'll try it. I'm not afraid.
Adacaptogene visalucil, I think.
It's pretty solid.
Something like that. Up top.
Yeah, I'd call that adacaptogene visalucil.
Perfect.
Great.
Idacel.
Adacel.
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 Adacel. Yeah, so this was looking at, and there are trials, I think, that are ongoing to look at giving this type of therapy earlier on in the disease course, so maybe even, as a frontline strategy. But this was looking at patients who have received 2 to 4 regimens previously for treatment of their myeloma. And they stratified the patients and randomized in a 2-to-1 ratio, so twice as many patients got randomized to the CAR T cell therapy and then the other group were given the choice of 1 to 5 other standard regimens, and I believe the investigators could choose which regimen they wanted to try.
What years was this study enrolled?
I'll tell you that in just a minute here.
Turn your mic a little bit more towards you.
It's in that first. There's that first.
Yeah, that's what I was
usually
trying to see.
from blah 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 blah.
You see that they didn't list the dates there.
Yeah.
I didn't print out the whole thing. I should have, but whatever.
What's the median follow-up, and then we can kind of maybe extrapolate backwards.
Yeah, the median follow-up was not that long so far. 18.6 months.
So probably new.
For myeloma, not very
Probably
long.
a couple of years old.
Yeah. They did assign the patients to a different dose range. That's just, I don't think, an important detail for the listeners, but their primary endpoint was progression-free survival, which you could argue is a contentious topic about whether we should use progression-free survival or should it be overall survival, meaning, judge a treatment based on whether patients are living longer, not just whether they progress
Blood work looks better.
later date or blood work looks better. And then secondary endpoints, we're looking at how well did people respond to the therapy and overall survival. I will say that the survival data, they said, is immature because they've just had 18 and a half months of follow-up thus far. But the primary endpoint, median progression-free survival was just over a year in the CAR T-cell therapy, 13.3 months. And in the other standard regimens, it was only about 4.5 months. So pretty significant 9 or so month improvement in progression-free survival. The response rate in the CAR T-cell therapy arm was 71%, and that means at least a partial response to therapy, and 42% in the standard arm group.
Yeah,
So
my question is, because I don't do myeloma obviously that much, were the options for the patients who were not on the CAR T cell, was it were they appropriately given one of those 5 options? I mean, would that be something you would offer a patient in this setting, or is it a substandard control arm?
Yeah, so the regimens as followed were daratumumab, pomalidomide, dexamethasone. Let me see here.
They've already failed some of these drugs.
Yeah, so yes, but I would say you only need 2 lines of therapy. So some of these patients might have undergone stem cell transplantation, potentially. So
because that's what always worries me about these trials is the control arm a substandard control arm, or even in some cases, are you giving patients drugs you've already seen?
Well, the only problem I have with the control arm is the variability in what was given, because we know, for example, one of these triplets is definitely shown to be, and I don't think any of these standard arms have actually been compared head to head. So I guess it'd be hard to say one's better than another, but response rates and progression-free survival in some of the studies are much better with certain triplets versus others. So you could argue that maybe just choosing one standard, but that would be hard to do because of the variability in what people were treated with.
No, I get that you have to have options. I guess the question for me is, in you as a medical oncologist, if you saw this patient, are those options things you would actually give the patient in the real world?
Yeah.
So it's not a clearly inferior.
Not inferior, because most of them are triplets. They gave the opportunity of one regimen, which isn't a triplet. And when I say triplet, I mean 2 myeloma drugs plus steroids, and that's a triplet for myeloma.
Did they break down how many got the triplets versus the doublet?
They probably did, but I might not have printed that out. But I imagine most people got triplets because the only reason you would, in my opinion, use a doublet would be that you have a patient who isn't as fit. And for clinical trial purposes, especially when you're thinking about putting on CAR T-cell therapy, which definitely has higher risks associated with it. Yeah.
What are the side effects specifically with CAR T that you see that you might not see with the standard triplet?
Yeah, the big one is going to be CRS, which stands for cytokine release syndrome. So think of it as when you infuse those lymphocytes, the immune cells, back into the patient, they have this rip-roaring cytokine release from the immune response. So it's sending all these proteins which signal more inflammation. And of course, you want some of that to kill the cancer cells, but it can really harm the patient secondary to the infusion. And symptoms of that includes fever, high fever sometimes, low blood pressure, confusion, shakes. Patient feels extremely fatigued, and they grade it 1 to 4. 3 and 4 CRS or cytokine release syndrome usually requires hospitalization because that's when you have low blood pressure and the patient kind of develops this shock state where difficulty controlling their blood pressure, they're confused potentially, sometimes confused to the point where they're in a coma. And you have to give treatment to reverse some of that cytokine release, which is basically putting a stop on that immune response. And they've looked at the safety of doing that, meaning the safety of administering immunosuppression after you give CAR T-cell therapy, because you do want that immune response to kill the cancer cells. But if someone's sick enough to require hospitalization as a result of the infusion, then you have to lower that immune response and save the patient first, you know. And it's safe to give, drugs like, it could be just steroid dosing, or they have a specific drug called tocilizumab, which they give a lot, that blocks that immune response.
Is that an interleukin or something?
Interleukin blocker, yeah. So I think it's IL-6 blocker. And so they have, it's a pretty standard protocol for CAR T-cell therapy and how to manage that toxicity. These are only given usually at the bigger institutions, usually academic centers like UF Gainesville or Mayo Clinic do the CAR T-cell therapies. Most of the other surrounding hospitals don't have the capability yet or the support staff yet to really do CAR T infusions, because it takes a lot of staff to and
plus the engineering side.
Yeah, right. Engineering side and even if you send it off to the lab outside of the hospital, I think you need a whole department where people are educated, nurses are educated, doctors are educated. You just need the whole team to know what they're doing.
Like bone marrow transplant, or something.
And this is a very expensive therapy. That's the other point here is, this showed an improvement of progression-free survival of 9 months. We'll see if it actually translates to overall survival, which is really the main endpoint that we're looking for. We're looking to see if therapies actually help patients live longer. So, is it going to be worth the added cost too, right? If a therapy is going to cost $500,000 to give potentially because of a prolonged hospitalization and just the cost of engineering the T cells, if it doesn't improve survival, I don't think there's going to be any insurance that's going to cover it, outside of a clinical trial. So it's all about, if it's improving survival, that's a good reason to approve a therapy like this. There are still trials going on with therapies like this, and there are also new drug formulations against this protein target, so BCMA. There's new antibody therapies that are called bispecific T-cell engagers, where you have an antibody created where they has a receptor protein that binds to BCMA, and then you have it attached to another receptor which binds to your immune system to activate it. So once it binds to the cancer, it activates your immune system, and the toxicities sort of like CAR T-cell therapy, where you have a risk of cytokine release syndrome with the BiTE. They call it BiTE therapies. But it's less than CAR T-cell therapy, and it's cheaper to give. And there's some formulations that are given even as a subcutaneous injection versus IV.
Wow.
So, and you don't need to harvest your immune cells. It's just given,
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. So they have trials with those type of therapies going on. And to plug our research department, we have one of those BiTE therapies available now for patients with certain type of B-cell lymphomas. So, anyone undergoing treatment for B-cell lymphoma, really look at our research page. We have a great trial of a new BiTE therapy that is one of the latest and greatest treatments for lymphoma.
It certainly sounds promising. It's awesome.
It does, yeah.
Nice.
Nice job.
Thanks, Brenna.
I feel like that didn't get me as riled up as you were hoping for.
No, it didn't. You didn't go on a rant here, Rick. But you had good questions.
I think you had a very reasonable, nuanced opinion. So I concur, Doctor.
It's hard to approve a therapy that probably costs near $300,000 to $500,000 for a progression-free survival benefit.
And like I always tell patients, especially in the metastatic, setting, is if we're not extending your life or improving your quality of life, ideally both.
Ideally,
but if we're not doing one of those two things,
right,
you really kind of got to think, what are we doing here?
Right. But even more of a reason to get onto trials, because even if it doesn't, pan out that this improves survival, at a minimum, it's obviously delaying progression. So you get a longer response with CAR T-cell therapy. And if you're in a clinical trial for it, you pay no money to get on these trials. It's just
I think
the monitoring and...
Yeah, I think also, too, there's a part of, if you want to go on a trial, like an altruistic way to think about, you're giving back to people who are going to be in your shoes in the future, and hopefully your enrollment on a trial will help inform
others of
the better options down the road. One way or whether it pans out or not, negative trials are just as important as positive trials.
Right.
Just not as
they don't get reported in the good journals.
Just not as sexy.
That's true. Not New England Journal.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Rick and Danny Show. I thought we had a great discussion here, Rick.
I think you did too, if you don't say so yourself. Talk to you guys next time.
See you later.